I'm Rosinah Mbenya. I'm the country coordinator for PELAM Kenya, and I will be sharing this session. I will be alongside three of the speakers, that is my colleagues or my counterparts, Josephine, Akia, the country coordinator of PELAM Uganda. We also have the Gertrude Pswarayi, country coordinator, PELAM Zimbabwe, and Tsakasile Dlamini, country coordinator for PELAM Swaziland. So welcome so much, and we are happy that you've chosen to join us in this session. This is going to be an interactive session. We shall be just sharing our experiences for the first 1 hour, and thereafter we shall have a session and a Q&A session where we can respond to any questions that do arise. In case you have something that you'd like us to note, please put it on the chat so that we can be able to respond to it in case it can't wait for the Q&A answer. As you can see, we are all from the PELAM Association, and PELAM Association is in full means Participatory Ecological Land Use Management Association. This is a regional network of civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and basically organizations that are promoting agroecological practices among smallholder farmers in East and Southern Africa. Our regional secretariat is based in Uganda, and our association is currently in 12 African countries. The countries that are represented here today are 4. There's Kenya, which I represent, there's Uganda, there's Zimbabwe, and there's also Swaziland. But we have other country chapters in Tanzania, in Rwanda, Malawi, Zambia, Lesotho, Botswana, South Africa, and also Ethiopia. And each of these countries is well equipped and well operational with the secretariat, and also now reaching directly to the smallholder farmers through the network that approach. So welcome so much. And as I mentioned earlier, our session today will be more of a sharing of our experiences on from the various countries about our work, particularly with the African women farmers. So please stay tuned, and I hope that it shall be a great learning experience for all. Once more, karibuni sana, that's a Swahili word for welcome. And with that, I would now like for us to just go straight to the session, whereby we shall be having the interaction session with the 3 speakers from the various countries that I've already mentioned. And just to start us off, we shall start with the speaker sharing about the general experiences in working with the African women farmers from the various countries, highlighting the critical role that the women, our young girls, and even ladies that play in agriculture and also land in Africa. So with that, I would like to go ahead and invite my counterpart, that's Josephine Akia from Uganda, to start us off, and then we shall proceed to another, to Gertrude, and later to Tsakasile. Thank you so much. Josephine.
Thank you so much, Rosinah. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Josephine Akia, working with Participatory Ecological Land Use Management, that is PELAM Uganda. And as you've already mentioned, I would like to share experiences of how. Thank you, Rosinah. Share experiences of how we are working with the across the world. We know that women depend a lot on agriculture and yet have very limited access when it comes to control of natural resources. And because of this, we are having women facing a lot of challenges, water and fuel for the household. And this then also crosses back to the girl child. And when we look at the role of agriculture, we are experiencing a lot of challenges, especially in Uganda. One is because when we look at land, we have a limited access in terms of utilization, ownership, but also control of the land resource. And yet these are the people who are the main producers when it comes to land. When you look at women also, we are having a biggest challenge when it comes to issues of reproductive roles versus male counterparts. Typical in Uganda, you'll have rural men getting up very early and going to the villages or the trading centers where they discuss what they call very critical issues of planning and discussing issues around the family. And yet the women are left to till, open the land, weed, harvest, but also take care of small animals. As a result, to reap from agricultural resources. When it comes to disasters, especially looking at a topic which is aspects of climate resilience or resilience towards food systems, women are the most affected when it comes to issues of disasters and are very less likely to survive during this kind of spells. And this has caused a lot of a long-standing gender inequality between the men and the women, which I would also want to associate and relate to the disparity in information, ability to move, that is the mobility, decision-making, and access to resources and training. We know that women are also laid back when it comes to leadership of our society and how Uganda is structured, and which is also common with most of the African countries. We are structured in a patrilineal society, meaning women will not be brought at the forefront when it comes to decision making and taking on a bit of leadership roles. So this, in general, limits their abilities to effectively contribute to economic development. I'll let my counterparts also share a bit more of their experiences from their countries. I submit.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Josephine. Yeah, Gertrude, please go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to pick on where Rosinah has left and acknowledging that women do face a triple burden in society, the productive burden, the reproductive burden, as well as the community burden. Looking at the Zimbabwean context, I'm sure many people have seen the media reports about Zimbabwe. We are facing socio-economic, political, and ecological challenges. In 2019, Zimbabwe, like many other African countries in Southern Africa, experienced a climate crisis where we were affected, rural communities were affected by Cyclone Idai, which devastated many of the communities in Zimbabwe, killing thousands of people in the country. But also looking at the climate crisis we are facing, it's becoming frequent to experience droughts, floods, cyclones, and this really affects women. So looking at the triple burden that women are facing, particularly around the productive role. I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep my camera off because my connection is not very strong. If you can allow me to continue presenting without the video. If you continue to look at the issue around productive burden, we want to look at women in a holistic context, understanding the roles that women perform in society, particularly women in rural areas. Many of these are the ones that care for the family, they care for the adults when disasters strike. They are responsible for domestic work. They are responsible for work related with looking for water, particularly when we are struggling to find sufficient clean, safe water. As we are faced with the climate crisis, women are also the ones that are responsible for looking for fuel to cook. And as we continue to face ecological crisis, women have to bear all these challenges. They have to bear all these difficulties as compared to their male counterparts. And also, when we look at the reproductive role, this is really about childbearing. As much as we would like to acknowledge gender equality, there are roles that women have to play, and childbearing is part of them. And in a patriarchal society, and in Zimbabwe in particular, rural women are expected to give birth, but also after giving birth, they're expected to continue with their chores. This also affects women as they perform their community work as well, which is part of what the women in Zimbabwe are facing. So just building on the challenges that I've just mentioned, which are also quite similar to what Josephine has highlighted in Uganda, women still have to bear this burden. As seed custodians, they need to look after seed. They need to look after land to make sure that it still produces enough to feed the family. They still have to look after the collective commons, the natural forests, the rivers, the water, to ensure that they provide clean water to families. And with the current crisis that we have in the country, it's very difficult for rural women, particularly farmers, to be able to provide food, to save seed, to look after the land, and to participate in decision-making on issues that are important to them with regards to food and nutrition security, with regards to weaving a healthy and sustainable community, and with regards to also making decisions that affect their lives. So in a nutshell, I would say that women do shoulder, in Zimbabwe, do shoulder these triple burdens, and they are exacerbated by the changing climate, the crisis that we have, but also a lack of recognition and acknowledgement of the role that women play in traditional societies, the knowledge that women have, the wisdom that they hold as women, particularly if we're looking at indigenous knowledge. So the disregard of women's voices in agriculture and in the greater society is really impacting on how much women can contribute to the development of the country, and really particularly looking at the conservation of natural resources, in particular seed, the land, and the collective commons in Zimbabwe. I'll pass it on to my colleague, Tsakasile. Over to you, Tsakasile.
Thank you, Gertrude. Yes, I do have a few experiences to share in the Swazi context. In Eswatini, one of our biggest, oh, sorry, I need to start my video. Sorry about that. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Tsakasile Dlamini from Swaziland, and now known as Eswatini. I think my comment really is rather focusing on cultural issues when it comes to Eswatini. Eswatini is deeply, deeply rooted in our culture and our cultural practices, and this has a really negative effect on women. For example, when it comes to land use practices, land use in terms of farming, it's mainly, whenever it's going to be a lucrative endeavor, it's related to men. Men always dominate in that space. And also in terms of our land tenure processes, like we have a system in Eswatini where, well, I'm sorry, am I audible, or should I perhaps turn off the video because my internet is not so great?
You are audible, Tsakasile. You are very audible.
Okay, good. So like in Eswatini, when it comes to like our land tenure, we have something called Swazi Nation land, and it mostly favors males or men. If you're a woman and you want to have land to grow food, or to take care of your family, it's really difficult if you're unmarried or you don't have a boy child. The Constitution has tried to address these issues, but we have had many recurring instances where women are subjected like to a really, let me say, thorough background check as compared to men. If you're a single woman looking for land to grow food and take care of your family, it's harder to get land on Swazi Nation land. You have to have a lot of money and go and buy property using the title deed kind of system. And that has been really, really difficult for a lot of women. And another thing also that has been kind of like making things difficult for women in Eswatini to fulfill their duties as custodians and providers of nutrition and sustenance to their families has been the lease. In Eswatini, when you get land, it's not really given to you, like it's not title deed land. It's on a lease kind of basis. You get it for 99 years. And if you break any of the community rules or guidelines, or you don't really adhere to whatever the community believes in, that lease is terminated and you don't have any land anymore. And those are the issues we've been dealing with. We've been dealing with cultural issues. We've also been dealing with the land tenure system, which is the Eswatini Nation land, Swazi Nation land, which is a lease system. And it's really been quite difficult for women to enjoy the same privileges as men do in Eswatini when it comes to owning land and utilizing land and getting permissions or kind of permits to use the land as they see fit once they get it. So those that's what I can say about the context in Eswatini.
Thank you so much, Josephine, Gertrude, and Tsakasile for sharing those very interesting experiences that cut across in most of the African countries. And indeed, there are so many challenges, as you can hear, but the role of women and young girls is very, very critical in the agriculture and land sector. And yeah, we just need to continue with this discussion as we have highlighted so many things, including climate change, issues about the seed, issues about culture, the reproductive roles, and even touching on aspects of income generation when it comes to the right of women, and particularly on not just the use of land, but the ownership and full control of land in the African context. But just going on, there is a lot that has been done in the past, and yeah, there are still these many challenges to the women and girls in Africa. So maybe we continue the speakers just from our perspective as the women leaders. What do you think are the major handles that have been there, and what needs to be done so that we can move on from these challenges or these handles that have been hindering the women and young girls from prospering? So just highlighting briefly from your perspective and in your countries, what do you think should be done to overcome these handles going forward? I'll start again with Uganda. So Josephine, please go ahead, and then Gertrude and Tsakasile in that order. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosinah. When you look at what has happened in terms of economic empowerment and the resilience that they need to build over time, is the whole hurdle of giving them the right to use, access, and control natural resources, especially the land. So this looks at the whole issue around the legal barriers which are clearly putting a stagnation into this whole economic development. So for us to be able to address that hurdle, we need to go and unpack the whole issues around the legal barriers. This entails creation of awareness around the legal rights to land in terms of women accessing this land, utilizing the land, and being able to control the resources around land and other natural resources. We need to do more sensitization about the different land laws, because like in Uganda, the constitution in itself talks about the land law. We also have the National Land Policy. We have the Succession Act, which is not so different from the scenarios that my colleagues Tsakasile and Gertrude talked about in terms of the challenges that come associated with the patrilineal land system, where a woman can't own the land, especially if you don't have a boy child. A woman is not allowed to even be considered a heir in terms of taking on or succeeding land in case their father passed on. So there's a lot in terms of the Succession Act that needs to be disseminated for us to be able to know and have the women benefit from that legal right. There are areas that also, there's another hurdle in terms of weak access to funding for legal and dispute resolutions when it comes to issues around land. Field and you're talking to the women farmers,
Josephine, your internet is breaking, but maybe you can switch off your camera so that we see whether it will be better. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Am I still there?
Yes, I think now it's better.
Okay,
Please
fine, thank you. So we need to see how are we programming and having interventions around women land rights and justice campaigns. How do we work with available land dispute resolution best paralegals? These are women leaders and male leaders within the community that offer a one-stop center in terms of issues around land rights, offer legal aid services, offer mobile land-related clinics within the population. And this is something that can easily be integrated within the work that we do as civil society organizations. There is also a hurdle when it comes to women's fear of violence from husbands or other family members as a result of claiming for their property rights, especially the land rights. And this also relates a lot more into succession. We need to build the confidence of the women. We need to create awareness. We need to build their leadership skills for the women to be empowered to speak and communicate and negotiate, especially when it comes to cultural land rights issues. Where are their voices? Can they speak up? Or we are still going to let this whole patriarchal kind of system let the women be at the background and still let the women, men take over when it comes to discussions? When are we going to let the women come to the forefront? And I think this is the time for us to be able to look at that. In Uganda, we also have a huge challenge when it comes to the multiple legal systems. We have quite a number of parallel legal structures in terms of the formal and informal land systems. We also have religious norms, especially by our colleagues, the Muslims, versus what the Christians will believe in. So when it comes to issues around the customary law, what prevails? Is it our normal doctrine of the law, or is it going to be the cultural or the religious law that takes precedence? We need to see how do we strike a balance when it comes to this, and especially when it comes to issues around marital property and inheritance regimes, which often make the women land rights dependent on the relationships that they have with men. If you're not married, for that reason, you can't have any access to this land right. And yet we are having many people, especially the women who are in kind of cohabitation relationships. This limits their right to access, especially the land. So we need to do a lot of this and see how do we strike a balance. There is also the need for us to invest in inclusive and social responsible land governance. In Uganda, because we are all geared and the government is prioritizing economic development to ensure that we derive our Agenda 2040, which is bringing Uganda out of driving us to a state where we are all economically empowered, we are all stable in terms of incomes. There is a lot of drive that is going into large-scale investments. So we are having foreign investors being given chunks, acres and hectares of land, looking and stretching into natural resources, which the women are dependent on, especially for fuel, medicinal values within the natural resources, especially the forests, water, because we have swamps and other safe water resources within this kind of ecosystems. So we need to see how do we ensure inclusive and social responsible land governance. When we are doing this kind of large-scale investments, where are the voices of the women coming in? Are we reflecting the indigenous communities? Are we sensitizing the communities in the knowledge or language that they better understand? Or we are still curtailed in the thinking and disseminating of this information in dossiers and very hard to understand English that our mothers and grandmothers may not be able to understand. So there's a need for us to go into that kind of work. Increasingly, in Uganda, we are looked at as non-government organizations that just come in to provide a supportive role to what the government does. So it limits our opportunities and our space in terms of engaging on certain critical issues, especially legal matters. This hurdle has increasingly made us face a challenge when we're coming in to speak and influence policy. And what is that we can be able to do? We need to create partnerships with the government, with the private sector, to see, and development partners, to see that we can all work together as partners to identify and work on the different barriers that are affecting women when it comes to our very important topic, women as custodians of land, but also their role when it comes to resilience and sustainable food systems. We need to see how do we address some of these issues, how do we work together in this kind of public-private partnership. So for me, I feel that is what we need to see and address in terms of the hurdles that I have talked about, but also the recommendations that I have underscored. I submit and move it over to Gertrude.
Thanks, Josephine. I would like to bring a different thinking into the conversation in terms of solutions to responding to the challenges that women are facing, not just in Zimbabwe, but across Africa. Many of the solutions that have been offered have been taking a capitalistic approach, which is very much rooted in productivity. And even if you look at different government agendas, it's about making Africa very productive, bringing new business, and all of this is done at the expense of women, at the expense of land, at the expense of other living beings, what we want to call natural resources. And I think that it's important to bring in an African perspective or the cosmology around the African thinking on how we relate to land, how we relate to other forms of life. In the African context, we have always known that Earth is alive and it bears a spirit. And it is this spirit that we connect with. And as women, we spend our time in nature and we connect with this spirit. So in terms of providing solutions, I would say that it's very important to give the space for women to reconnect with their inner wisdom. And they can only do this when the land is healthy, when forests are not destroyed, when rivers, the land are not taken away because of capitalistic agendas. We need to provide a creative and conducive environment for women to truly connect with themselves and be able to give them the confidence and the power to take charge of their lives. It's also important to allow women to have spaces where they can meet and be themselves. We mentioned the productive roles that they play, the reproductive roles that they play, and also the community roles, and these take away time from women. It's very important to ensure that women have spaces where they can be themselves. It's very difficult as a woman to have time for yourself, just to do self-care, so that this woman can show up and be able to hold everyone and be able to produce food to feed the nation, because we know that women form the bulk of the labor force when it comes to agriculture, yet they are not given enough time to just care for themselves. So I think one of the solutions really is to provide spaces where rural women can meet, can be themselves, can connect with their inner wisdom and begin to draw on their strength. It's also very important to tap into our traditional ecological governance systems. I know that when we have these conversations, there's a lot of debate about gender injustice within African context, and I think that this is a misconstrued perspective on how indigenous communities truly work. There is need to go back to roots and really connect with the wisdom of Africa. This wisdom really appreciated women, gave women their roles. You can even see when we talk about women as seed custodians. This is a role that is very powerful in the production of food, in feeding a nation and ensuring that communities are held together. Women had their own spaces. They could control conversations. They could make decisions in truly authentic African communities. And I think that the bringing in of modernization, and also romping in of capitalistic agenda has really eroded the African way of how things work, how communities work, gender roles within a community, so that it is functional without having to repress each other. So it's very important to redefine this space for women, so that women can take full control and charge of their lives, and also be able to contribute to taking care of other forms of life, the rivers, the forests, the mountains, and all of Earth's children. It's also important to tap into conventions that are already available. For instance, we can talk about the African Charter, which provides for a space for African governments to really recognize indigenous knowledge and wisdom and tap into what we have as Africans. And I think that it's important to bring this into the conversation, to say, as much as we can talk about other solutions that are foreign, it's important to draw on the wisdom of Africa. And as Zimbabweans and as Kenyans, Ugandans, wherever we are as Africans, and particularly as women, we need to tap into the wisdom that Africans have, the role that women used to play in our traditional communities that gave us the power and the strength to be called women, and women of influence. We did have power and we did have spaces where we could be heard. But then the destruction of our cultural practices, our norms, our values, and how we relate to land and other natural resources is the one that we need to correct. It's important that we reconnect with the web of life if we truly want to reweave the basket in Africa and ensure that the role of women is fully recognized, is acknowledged, and is also seen as an important factor if we are looking at resolving the current crisis that we have, particularly as we talk about climate change, resilience, food sovereignty, and seed sovereignty. I think, let me pause here. I won't pick on other conversations that Josephine has highlighted. I felt that it was important to bring in this African traditional perspective into the picture and how we can tap into our wisdom as Africans and truly honor our heritage and also the wisdom that our elders carried. And as women and as African women, and also tapping into the knowledge that rural African farmers have, it's important to acknowledge what these women have, the knowledge that they have, the wisdom that they hold, to be able to reweave the basket of life in African communities. Over to you, Tsakasile.
Wow, thank you, Gertrude. Is it fine if I don't turn on the video? Okay, turn on the video. Okay, it's on. It's just I worry that I'm also gonna keep getting disconnected because of the quality of internet service that we have. But I really love the contributions that Josephine and Gertrude have made. I just wanted to add a small little bit in particular regarding education. In Eswatini, one of the issues that we've realized as we've done our work with women has been there is a link, a very key and important link between primary and high school education regarding the way that gender is construed in society. So in Eswatini, we've realized that there is a need for all our citizens to have some kind of education, because the less education you have, the more difficult it is to grasp concepts such as women and men are equal, gender equity, things like that, emancipation of women. And then also when it comes to the availability of opportunities, it's really difficult for women. It has been in Eswatini to receive or have access to the same opportunities as men. And that's one of the really difficult things that we have observed. No matter how much work has been done to try and address the issues of gender inequality, gender inequity, it's been, we need to start at the grassroots. Let's start at the very beginning. And in our opinion, we believe that we should begin at the bottom. Start with the education, make sure that everyone knows the basic principles of humanity, the basic principles of the roles that each of us has to play in society. They're not necessarily gender roles, but they are humanity roles. As a human being, what are you contributing to the progress and moving forward of your family unit or whatever unit you're in? And those are the things I think we need to really talk about. When it comes to favorable conditions in Eswatini, it's been really tough because Eswatini is still a really, really patriarchal country. It's been really difficult to kind of move forward gender issues. We're only now trying to manage the issues of gender-based violence and so on with the new laws and whatnot. But to try and address the issues of really women being recognized for their immense role in society, I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen. So I just wanted to add that tiny little snippet to say education is really, really important in Eswatini. Yeah, in our context. That's all.
so much. I'm really excited and happy to hear of the great experiences. I hope everyone is also enjoying. And yeah, just to also highlight that the fact that the education, as Tsakasile mentions, is very important. And even as we start at the grassroots, it's also very important to start when from a young tender age, so that these things are also integrated in school curriculums and in as we grow the young generation, so that they grow up with some of the values. Because as all the speakers are highlighting, the culture is also a very big hindrance in the African context, whereby it's deep rooted in our societies and becomes very, very difficult to make change happen. As Uganda highlighted, there are laws like the Succession Acts, which is also in Kenya, but you find that these acts are not yet being implemented because of some of these cultural aspects. You find the customary laws are also contradicting, and when the legal issues are being pursued, they are also very expensive, time-consuming, and it becomes a very, very difficult issue for the women. Yeah, so we just continue to share about the experiences, and we are almost coming to the last round of our questions, and just goes back to our speakers, so that we can now share our experiences in the different countries on what the interventions that we are having in the different countries, what is working, and what are the lessons that we are getting from the interventions that we are working on in terms of women and girls, in the issues of climate change, in the issues of seeds, in the issues of culture, in the issue of land rights, and also particularly also in the issue of agroecology. So back to our speakers, so that you can hear more about that. And please keep noting your questions so that you can be able to respond in the next session that we shall have shortly after this. Thank you. So we start again in the same particular order: Josephine, Gertrude, and then Tsakasile. Thank you.
So maybe before you go back to maybe before you go back to Josephine, I think you did touch on a very important issue, the issue to do with the legal space. And I think that was Josephine who spoke about the legal space. And in many of the African countries, we inherited colonial laws which have not been reviewed. And for me, I think this is a critical issue that needs to be addressed, because if our governments are still using colonial laws to govern free people, then I think it's important that we do advocacy work to have these laws reviewed, so that they are truly taking into cognizance the role of women in an African context, the role of nature, and how we relate to nature, so that we create communities that are truly and deeply connected to the land. Because without doing this, it means that we will continue to deplete other forms of lives. And this will impact on the lives of women when the land is degraded, when the soils are degraded, when the trees have been cut, when the rivers are polluted. It does come back to affecting women. So it's very, very important for our governments to look at the laws that are in place, so that they truly speak to the agenda of Africans and really speak to developing our communities in a way that we want to go, in a path that we want to go as Africans. And as women, they need to take into cognizance our role, our value, what we bring to the society, what we bring to the table as we work with our male counterparts. So yes, we can talk about the legal space, what is currently available, but it's important to highlight the need to look at all these laws to ensure that they do not contradict with each other, but also ensuring that these laws speak to what we believe as Africans and what we believe, how we should be relating to the land, how we should be relating to seed as women, and how we should be relating to other forms of life. I think this is at the heart of the conversation. To say, as much as we talk about the role of women as custodians, and when we talk about custodians, it's not talking about ownership. We cannot own forms of life. We cannot own seed. We cannot own land. We cannot own even the sun, but we are merely custodians. So as custodians, what is the legal space that is available in countries that should ensure that the custodianship of women is acknowledged versus private rights that make people devour land, rape land, abuse land, because I'm actually using these words because that is what happens when we mine, when we do farming that is unsustainable, when we come and we relate to forest as, you know, when you look at trees and you see paper, you don't look at trees and see a brother or a sister when you look at the river. So it's very important that we reframe our thinking as we look at the legal space, the laws that are there, the strategies that we develop as nations, and be able to enter into spaces where we can challenge these laws, the national strategies, the policies, to ensure that they speak to what women need to be doing as custodians, and also honoring these ancestral duties and holding duty bearers accountable. I think this is what we need to bring to the conversation. Over to you. I think I need to bring it back to Josephine as we wind down the session.
Thank you so much. I was really moving with the flow, Gertrude, and looking at the way you were emphasizing and looking at some of the things that have put us stay in the back, especially as women. And I'll immediately try to dive in the question that Rosinah has put before us in terms of what exactly do we need to focus our attention if we need to see that women and girls take central roles in decision making and leadership. And I'll begin by asking myself, where did we go wrong, especially looking at the African context as women? And if you look at how we are nurtured right from childhood, looking at the African society, it's okay for a girl to cry, but it's not okay for a boy to cry. It's very okay for a girl to drop out of school and divert into marriage, whereas it's very okay for a boy to go on and have all the education all through to university and even proceed to other tertiary forms of education. I think now is the time for us to stand firm as Africans and see how do we put all our male and female children at an equal footing. What right now is the time for us to stop this kind of stereotyping and see that we develop and inculcate a value amongst our children, both boys and girls, that you are all equals. A girl can lead just as a boy can lead. And it has been proven that organizations or women that are in places of leadership actually are better managers compared to our male counterparts. It's an area that can be contested, but I think more research needs to be done for us to comfortably claim this space and say, yes, we have been able to do this much better than our counterparts. And this is the time for us to begin looking at some of these areas and see how do we unpack that. When you're looking at the limited education, for instance, also going back into the stereotyping, there's need for the girl child to be educated. And in Uganda, we have a common saying that when you educate the girl child, you educate.
We are losing you, Josephine.
Yes, please.
Okay, we had lost you a bit. Okay, you can go ahead.
Now?
Now we can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So I think as women, we have that ability to multitask, but also to be able to remember a lot more. And if you look in the African context, Uganda in specific, if you're looking at the person who has all the wisdom in terms of indigenous knowledge, when it comes to conservation of seed, when it comes to medicinal values, when it comes to preservation of seed and preparation of our indigenous foods, it is the woman. So it's high time that we went into that space and see how are we going to be able to document, but also ensure that the girl child is educated to be able to be literate enough to document some of his experiences. The policies, as Uganda and most African states, maybe even our Western counterparts, we believe in democracy, but how often are we practicing the whole aspects and tenets of democracy in totality. We need to see that when we are looking at women's participation or participation in policy processes, in decision-making processes, it's an equal footing for all genders. It's not only 60%, it's not only affirmative action. This tends to belittle us, because if you're looking at a girl being promoted because of affirmative action, it's really good, but it's increasingly incriminating us and putting us as the inferior sex. And yet we know that we can do much more or even better than our male counterparts. So how are we going to be able to promote democracy in totality? By increasing women's participation in power spaces, but also ensuring that when we are there, we are not only having the affirmative action of saying that there's a woman, we are having a representation of a woman, but actively and meaningfully participating in this policy decision-making processes, right from the grassroots level, the farmer group meetings, for instance. Person as a woman, are we having advice as a woman? And not only giving us the roles as secretary, because that's what happens in most of the farmer groups. As long as there's in the executive committee, a woman is a secretary, then they will say that we are having women representation. But what is the role of a secretary? Do you even have the time to actively participate and deliberate on some of the issues that are being put on the front? Most of 10 times, maybe not, because even technology doesn't allow us, especially if you're looking at the rural woman. Unlike now, where Zoom can aptly allow us to record, and there you can refer to to refer to the recording in case you're transcribing. So there's need for us to support also when it comes to technological advancement. How much of it favors the woman? We are looking at tractors. We are looking at computers. We are looking at mechanizing agriculture, which also greatly contradicts with some of the principles of agroecology. But how is this technology quite conducive for the girl child, for the women, for them to be able to see how they balance their gender and reproductive roles with the productive roles that society has made us be able to take on? How is our unpaid labor, for instance, being recognized? When I am pregnant, for instance, as a woman leader, am I given that flexibility in terms of a work schedule because of the challenges that come with childbearing? What happens if it's a male counterpart? Is it a space that I will be considered, or because of, you know, my limited efforts to actively participate and be productive in nomination or active when it comes to appraisals? So we need to see how do we kind of strike a balance and be able to recognize that, yes, in addition to the productive roles, women have other reproductive roles that may hinder or need to be clearly addressed and strategies put in place for us to be able to compete and participate in decision-making and leadership position, just like our counterparts. And for me, this cuts across right from a rural woman to the elite woman or to the leaders that we are right now and deliberating in this platform. We need to be heard. We need to have our spaces. We just not need to be tolerated, but now is the time for us to come out and also get that space and be able to affirm ourselves better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We pass on to Tsakasile since Gertrude had already put his word, and time is also not on our side. So Tsakasile, maybe summarize your point. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I actually thought maybe Gertrude was going to make a submission, but yes, I am ready with my comment. When it comes to the socioeconomic gaps, honestly, I genuinely believe that men have been given, like males have been given more of a benefit in terms of being trustworthy, being more reliable compared to women. And it all goes back to that point that I mentioned in the beginning, which is that of education. We need to get our young children to understand that there isn't one gender that is more superior to another. We Hello?
We have lost you, Tsakasile. Okay.
Oh,
Okay, yeah,
apologies.
now you're okay. You're back. Continue, please.
Apologies. I'm sorry, I won't be sharing my video because I'm trying to make sure that my voice is as clear and audible as possible given my internet connection. It's been really difficult for women to try and gain credibility in terms of the economic arena when it comes to agribusiness and so forth. Because mainly in Eswatini, I'll use Eswatini as my yardstick because this is where I live. It's mainly believed that when it comes to business, it's mainly the men who know what they're talking about. It's mainly the men who know how to deal with money. And that literally takes me back to the beginning of my submission where I said, we need a lot of education. We need a lot of exposure so that our people, our young people can learn and understand that the belief systems that we had before are not necessarily current and true and correct. Women can actually be active players in agribusiness. Women can actually be really good when it comes to contributing to the economy. And in my country, that has not been something that people are really aware of or, in tune with. So that's one of the gaps that we need to address. We need to enlighten people and make sure that people get that education from the very beginning at a very young age, that we are not inferior as a species. And I won't speak for other countries. I'll just speak for Swaziland, Eswatini. Women have generally been considered as dependents to men for until recently, very recently, women were considered dependents. And we're still working to get that out and show that women are actually a really critical and important contributor to the economy of the country. I think that's what I can add there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, our beloved speakers. The sharing has been great and we are learning a lot, and because of time, allow me just to kind of round it up. I don't know whether there's something which is very, very pressing from the speakers, but we shall have the next session on the question and answer, where we can also as well top up a few or small things that we have not yet mentioned. But before we come to an end, I would also like to say that different actors in the African context are also actively engaging on the space of women and also youth, and particularly on the issues of their rights and control and access to the various resources, including land and agriculture resources, among others. And I would like to just briefly mention about a very big initiative that we are having as the Pelham Association, that is called African Women Leaders in Agroecology, abbreviated as AWOLA. And this is an ambitious program or initiative to mentor young women. We are matching young emerging women with seasoned women leaders so that they can be able to pass on the baton. They can be able to mentor and coach these young girls into becoming women leaders in agroecology even in the future. And the mentored girls are also supposed to continue passing the knowledge that they've gained. So we believe that this is something that is going to impact the African context, because we are going to have more and more women leaders who are very, very much seasoned, who are able to speak up and be able to articulate issues that affect themselves and eventually impacting the space of agroecology. There's also a lot being done in various fields, but that is what I wanted to highlight to this session as we come to an end of the sharing and as we move to the next Q&A question. So we shall have a short, like 30 seconds break so that before we may move to the next session of the Q&A. Thank you so much for your time and for your listening.